Welcome everyone to my June video newsletter. I didn't get one out last month because I was kind of dealing with some health issues and other things coming up. So I'm happy to be sending out a message this month. And I'd like to talk about sitting in the unknown. This has been something that's really been at the forefront of my being over the last several years, but even more so over the past couple of months, just sitting with not knowing. And there's a practice that I initially heard from a teacher named Adyashanti. He's a meditation teacher. And the practice is called Meditative Inquiry. And so it's just sitting with questions. It's a meditation practice where we sit with a question or multiple questions without having to figure it out, without having to solve it at the level of the mind. We just sit with what is there. And for me personally, this has been something that I've been practicing for several years now because I've shared quite a bit of my health journey already, but you know that I've been quite ill for, about 7 to 10 years now, and there's no clear answer around it, which is incredibly frustrating. I'm a physician assistant myself, so I have a medical background. I've seen probably over 50 doctors, energy healers, naturopaths, and there's just no clear answer. There are labels, there's chronic fatigue syndrome, maybe Gulf War syndrome, these syndromes that we give a label to because we don't fully understand what's going on. And so because there's been no clear mental knowing around it or no clear answer, this process of sitting in questions has become more grounding for me. It's been a tool that's really been helpful. Because in sitting with questions, we open up to possibilities that surpass any knowing at the level of our minds. We all know that our minds are like computers. They've been programmed. We learn knowledge, we learn patterns, we learn beliefs. And all of that, our mind can be helpful, and it can also be the source of an immense amount of suffering. It can be limiting if we don't know how to use it or if we feel confined by our mind. So by sitting with questions, we move beyond the mental knowing and we move into a deeper wisdom. Sometimes it's, wisdom in the body, the soul, the spirit, whatever you want to call it. But it's something that's bigger than the limited knowing at the level of our minds. And this can be scary, I know, because when we don't know something cognitively, it can be unsettling if we're not used to it. And we live in a culture where we want to know everything. And with modern day technology, we have that at our fingertips, or at least the illusion that we have that at our fingertips. Google it. You're sitting in a traffic jam. I'm going to look at my phone and see how much longer I have to sit in this traffic jam. We have to know immediately. And in reality, there's so much that we don't know. And this has really become so obvious to me going through this whole health journey and seeing so many different providers and reading things. I've been referred to different websites around what might be going on in my body. And because there's no clear-cut answer, oftentimes people either say you have to resign yourself to this or just accept it, which, yes, that has its place. But resignation is not the place to go with this, because resignation is kind of like, well, I don't care. I'm not going to do anything about it. But just thinking of some of the resources that I've read, it's been very disturbing because it's basically like, because we don't know exactly what's going on, there's nothing wrong. There's no problem. This is either all in your head, psychosomatic, it's anxiety, it's depression. And I'm not discounting those things at all because those are very, very real. I'm just saying with these kind of larger complex health issues, because we don't have a complete mental knowledge around it or knowing around it, people just assume that it's chronic fatigue syndrome and there's very little you can do about it. And I just refuse to settle for those ideas. I think the labels are important. They give us a context, they give us a direction. And yet, if we are stuck in those labels, they limit us, they confine us. And then we stop seeking. So by sitting with questions instead of constantly seeking answers, it opens us to something different. It opens us to something, I think, more true than anything that we can know in our minds. There's a saying that one of my meditation teachers told me years ago, that if you live into the question, you'll live into the answer. So if you live into the question, you'll live into the answer. So it's really putting a lot of faith and trust in the question instead of the answer. Because, there's been so many times we've thought we've had an answer and it actually wasn't right. Or maybe it was semi-right or partially correct. But then we learned more and we found out, oh, that actually wasn't true or that wasn't right. Again, going back to medicine, you think of 100 years ago, the things that we just didn't know. We didn't know what we didn't know. And so we've lived into these questions, all this research. Research starts with a question and a hypothesis, a guess, an educated guess. But the question is what starts it all. And so my invitation to you is just to experiment with sitting with questions. And so the meditative inquiry practice is quite simple. It's not easy because it can bring up that kind of groundless feeling of the mind wanting to know so badly. I know that feeling. I think we all know that feeling very well, that our minds just want to know. They want to figure it out. They want an answer and they want it right now. And so it's training our minds a little differently to actually sit in the unknown for a little bit. So the meditation practice would be to find a quiet space. Don't even set a timer. I don't like to put constraints around this type of practice. It's more just kind of feeling into what's right for you. But find a quiet space, find a comfortable position. Start by just becoming mindful of your body and your breath. And then tuning into the question, whatever question arises for you. Some of the bigger ones for me are, what is my truth? What is my most authentic path? Or when it comes to my health, sometimes I'll just kind of focus in on that part of my body and ask, what is this really? What's asking to be seen? And so the practice would be just to kind of sit with the breath, feel the breath, and as you feel the breath, you mentally whisper the question. So it's almost like the question is riding on the flow of the breath. So breathing in, I can ask the question, what is my most authentic path? And then just releasing, letting go on the exhale. Take a few more breaths, settle in, and then asking the question again, what is my most authentic path? And just allowing, what happens with time is, one, it gives the mind a focus. So it's also like a concentration and focus practice. It helps the rest of the mind to settle a little bit, even though our mind will start to say, oh, this is the answer, this is the answer. The practice is to simply say, okay, thank you, thank you for your opinion, and then come back to the question. And that's it. We're just sitting with the question. And sometimes what happens is during the sitting practice, some kind of clarity comes to you. Sometimes it takes weeks, months, sometimes it's years. But if we can trust in this process a little bit, I believe in that phrase, if you live into the question, you'll live into the answer. And if we try to rush the process and figure it out at the level of our mind, which we're all going to do, that's just normal, But sometimes it creates more frustration. Again, I know this process very well, trying to figure things out. But there's a liberation that comes when we can actually sit back and be in curiosity, where we can kind of rest in that beginner's mind of, I actually don't know the answer to this, and can I just be with not knowing? And it can open us up to infinite possibilities beyond the restrictions of our mind. So I encourage you to play around with this practice. And as part of my own mindfulness teaching, I do one-on-one sessions with people where I guide you through meditations. And if this is a process that you'd like to do one-on-one, you can feel free to reach out to me. And I hope you have a great month. I hope you're able to find the infinite possibilities that lie within being curious and resting in questions.